Hi, welcome to another episode of Tom Kennedy Science, and I'm your host, Dr. Tom Kennedy. Now, today what we're going to talk about is the importance of cellular respiration. Why do we care about this? And I have to admit, I learned cellular respiration back in the 1990s when I was at Florida State University. The professor walked in and he drew all of these chemical equations on the board of glycolysis, and then he did it for Krebs cycle, and my head was swimming. And I'm sitting here going, why am I learning this? Right? I had no appreciation for it. I mean, I just wanted to go birding and work outdoors, right, as a biologist. Why am I learning all this chemistry? Well, let me tell you, in the last 25 years, I have learned a lot about cellular respiration, especially in the last 10. And now, cellular respiration is one of my favorite things to teach in biology. I know, even when I get to teach general vertebrate zoology, I still really enjoy teaching cellular respiration, and in all honesty. And the mitochondria are my favorite organelle. I know, that's weird, isn't it? So how did I come to love cellular respiration so much and have this fondness for an organelle, the mitochondria? So why do we care? Well, I hope today my goal is to convey to you why I think it's so important and why I get excited about teaching it. And to do so, let me set the stage here. So what I want to do is go back in time, way back in time. And I want to look at what were the key evolutionary steps that led to the evolution of cellular respiration and mitochondria and ultimately us. So, the Earth is old. It's like 4.6 billion years old. And sometime around 4 billion years ago to 3.8 billion years ago, the first life began to evolve. And those were prokaryotes. Life started out simply because it had to. Now, at some point, we got photosynthesis. Now, we're not exactly sure when photosynthesis evolved, but probably by 3 billion years ago, we have oxygenic photosynthesis from a prokaryote called a cyanobacteria. Interestingly, plants never evolved photosynthesis, but bacteria did. This was a major evolutionary innovation because what these cyanobacteria did is they took the energy in sunlight, right, coming down, and they could take carbon dioxide and water and fix that into a carbohydrate. Now that's important for a couple of reasons. One is it made a lot more carbon and nutrients available to life on this planet. And second, it also made more energy available as well. However, the first early organisms they weren't very efficient, so they didn't use a lot of that extra energy, but they definitely could use the extra nutrients. Now, if you look at this equation for photosynthesis, and many of you already know this, plants release oxygen. Photosynthesis releases oxygen. You're probably going, yeah, wow, that's a good thing. And it is. For us, to the first life on this planet, as oxygen levels slowly rose, it was damaging, right? I mean, oxygen levels continued to rise. The first life on this planet evolved without oxygen. And oxygen is damaging, right? It's the second most electronegative element in the universe. Oxygen loves electrons, right? So it oxidizes everything around it. It can oxidize lipids. It can oxidize membranes. It can oxidize proteins. It can oxidize your DNA. So life had to come up with some way of dealing with the extra oxygen. And guess what? It did. About 2 billion years ago, we start getting the evolution of cellular respiration. Once again, prokaryotes are quite innovative when it comes to new routes of metabolism here. Now, when I talk about cellular respiration, what I'm really talking about is respiration using oxygen. And that respiration is kind of like a chemiosmosis. And we always show it as like using glucose, C6H12O6, in the presence of oxygen to break down the glucose, and it could be other organic molecules as well, into carbon dioxide and water. And cellular respiration uses the electron-loving properties of oxygen to really increase the efficiency of cellular respiration. So what it did is it allowed life to get a lot more energy out of the foods that it ate. And you can imagine that's important. So it made a lot more ATP. Now, let me just talk a little bit about what happens next in the evolution of eukaryotes with the mitochondria. About 2 billion years ago, the third most profound evolutionary event in the history of life occurred. When we have like photosynthesis, we've got cellular respiration, now we've got endosymbiosis. Endo means within, symbiosis means living together. What happened? What we think happened is that a small aerobically respiring bacteria bored its way into another archaean. And then it was an intracellular parasite, but those two cells were living together, and then over time, the relationship changed to be more mutualistic. And today, that little intracellular parasite is now our mitochondria, and it's a total, it turned into a beneficial relationship completely. And from there, from that first round of endosymbiosis, led to the evolution of eukaryotic cells. This was the biggest restructuring of cells in 1.5 billion years of evolutionary history. That's amazing, right? Everything was prokaryotes, structurally simple, but now we've got these larger, more complex cells. And of course, we know that eukaryotes, they went on to go evolve into animals and plants. There are no multicellular prokaryotes, only eukaryotes. So that's important. And the reason why is because you can pack a eukaryotic cell with mitochondria. I mean, you go look at a diagram and yeah, I mean, it shows 3 or 4 mitochondria in a diagram of a eukaryotic cell. But the reality is that a really active cell, thousands of mitochondria in it. Now, here's one of my pet peeves. The way endosymbiosis is often portrayed is not always correct. And we can actually like use what we know, what we've already learned in cell biology to kind of disprove this beautiful image right here. I know, I love this diagram. It's so nice and pretty. And what it shows is a prokaryote slowly getting larger and evolving into a proto-eukaryote and then engulfing the cell that would go on to become the mitochondria. Oh, well, I mean, let's think about why that's wrong, right? First thing, we know of no prokaryotes capable of doing phagocytosis. So what do you need for phagocytosis? Remember, that's bringing in something into a cell. You need a cytoskeleton. Specifically, you need microtubules, actin filaments, and motor proteins. Do prokaryotes have those? No, they do not. Okay, prokaryotes are often much smaller and they have a cell wall around them too, which is also kind of difficult for bringing in things. Second, this shows a cell evolving to become larger and larger and larger. Now, here's a very important point about prokaryotes. ATP production limits their size. You see, every cell on this planet makes ATP through a process called chemiosmosis. They're basically making ATP across their membranes, right? So a prokaryotic cell being small, they make plenty of ATP. But the minute they start to grow larger, well, that's not good, right? Because your volume starts increasing at the third power, your surface area starts increasing at the second power. So once you start evolving to become larger, you quickly, very quickly, run out of ATP. So therefore, prokaryotic cells cannot evolve to grow much larger than what they are. Of course, there's some exceptions, but there's reasons for that. But they did not do what this showed here. Plus, they don't have cytoskeletons. They can't do phagocytosis. So that's how we know that one cell did not engulf another cell in the origins of eukaryotes. Now, look at steps 5, 6, and 7. Those are correct. Once eukaryotes evolved, a second round of endosymbiosis led to the evolution of plants by engulfing a cyanobacteria, and that did happen. Okay, so there. Now we've got my endosymbiosis set out straight. And you guys, I mean, you would have figured this out if you just thought about it a little bit. Okay. So, all right, that's a little bit of history. Kind of cool, you know. We know that the endosymbiosis led to the origin of eukaryotic cells. But let me be clear about this. Multicellular life, I'm talking all plants, animals, and fungus, they would not be possible without mitochondria doing cellular respiration. So this made multicellular life possible. you're probably looking at these images going, what is that? Well, those are very primitive organisms. There's sponges. There's the ancestors to chordates up there. And there's some algae that's not even a plant yet. So kind of cool picture. This is taken from a mangrove swamp in North Florida. Not North Florida. This is taken from a mangrove swamp down in the Florida Keys. Okay, let's take a step back. Life needs energy. All right, now if you're a heterotroph like us, we get chemical energy from the foods we eat. If you're an autotroph, you get your energy from sunlight. But even plants have to take energy in sunlight, transform it to glucose, and then they actually burn the glucose to make ATP. So they do things like we do. So we use energy to do work. We create order, maintain homeostasis. And of course, cellular respiration takes the energy in the foods we eat, the chemical energy, and transfers that to ATP. And it's efficient. And that is important. And this is the overall equation for that we'll get into more detail on another lecture here. So another reason why cellular respiration is so important is at the heart of our metabolism. Okay? We have catabolic reactions, which are breaking down organic molecules. We have anabolic reactions that build them up. So cellular respiration, even though this is a catabolic reaction that we're using to extract energy from it, the reality is more complicated than that, right? We don't just break down carbohydrates. We also break down lipids and amino acids, and we can use them for energy. Okay, so that's catabolic. But as we break them down, we create new molecules. And those molecules can be building blocks to make other molecules in anabolic reactions. And if you look at this, that line, that's glycolysis, the circle, that is the Krebs cycle. So cellular respiration is at the heart of our cellular metabolism. So that's kind of cool for anybody out there and interested in biochemistry. This is really more of what our cell metabolism looks like, right? It's pretty wild, kind of detailed. I expect you guys to memorize that. Yeah. Just think about the amount of work that has gone into that. The Krebs cycle took Hans Krebs 10 years to figure it out, and he got a Nobel Prize for that. So, okay, it's heart of our metabolism. Made multicellular life possible. It's way more efficient. You can see oxidative phosphorylation. That's the part that's using oxygen to make ATP. So, animals, we're active. I mean, we have muscles. We have a nervous system. We have brains. I know, brains use a lot of energy. Your brain uses 20% of your energy, even if you're dozing off right now. So they made our active lifestyles possible, and studying mitochondria and problems with mitochondria can affect how people have different energy levels. But here's where it starts to get interesting, right? Mitochondria are also important for aging. Here's Betty White, right, from the 1950s to today, and she's aging very nicely, but she's aging. I'm aging. You know, we all start young and then we age. And, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was a bit of a hero of mine for multiple reasons. I mean, he did bodybuilding. He kind of succeeded at that. Acting, he really succeeded at that. Went into politics and became governor of the state of California. So he did 3 things in life pretty well, right? And you can see he's aging, right? And then that was me, oh my gosh, back in 2008 with my workout partner, my buddy Jay. We still try to work out, not in COVID times. I don't look like that anymore. We age. And the question is, why do we age? You know, what's causing us to age? And if we can figure out what causes us to age, maybe we can slow it down. And guess what? Mitochondria might be involved with this. Think about this. So think about this. There's a brown noddy, and that bird might live up to 30 years, whereas a rat that's about the same size, it only lives like 3 years. And then a human, we live to be over 80, and a chimpanzee, which is basically the same size as us, lives half that, like 40 years. And then, you know, one of the saddest things in the world is our dogs only live to be like 12 years. You know, I wish my little buddy could be my little buddy for the rest of my life, basically. But the point is, different animals age differently, right? So some animals age more quickly than others. Why is that? Why does a mouse or a rat only live 3 years? Why does a bird live 10 times longer than a mammal of similar size? And that's really interesting. And of course, the mitochondria might have something to do with that. Here's another example. Not only do birds live longer than mammals on average, but they often show like no signs of aging, and we call that senescence. So in 1951, this ornithologist named George Dunnett, he collected a northern fulmar and put a band on it. And then in 1984, he collected the same bird again 33 years later. Now think about that. The bird was already an adult in 1951. They don't actually know the age of it. So it was 33 years old at least in 1984. Actually, it had to be at least 34 years old. It was a breeding bird. And then was caught again in 1992. The bird lived for at least 40 plus years. But here's the kicker. It's not that the bird lived for 40 years. The bird looked the same in 1951 as it did in 1992. Now, I don't know about you, but I definitely do not look the same as I did 20 years ago. I had a lot more hair, and my beard is a lot grayer. So, we are definitely aging. So what's going on here? Why do birds not only live longer, but show very little signs of aging throughout their life? Well, if you're guessing mitochondria has something to do with that, you're almost certainly right. I talked about how great mitochondria are. They totally made our life possible, our multicellular active lifestyles. But they use oxygen. And sometimes oxygen doesn't play by the rule book, and it grabs the electrons randomly in these mitochondria and forms what's called an ROS, a reactive oxygen species. You know these as free radicals. And basically, reactive oxygen species, they lack a pair of electrons. So they are incredibly reactive, and they build up oxidative damage in the cells of these animals. So over time, part of our aging is we build up oxidative damage. And birds having flight, well, flight is really energetically expensive, right? So it's thought that somehow a lot of exercise and animals that are really, really active tend to live longer because they produce fewer ROSs. And, never confuse an ROS with an ROUS, which is, of course, a rodent of unusual size found in the fire swamps in the great movie, The Princess Bride. So there we go. That's really wild, right? We can study birds and other animals, like bats as well, they live a long time too, to understand how differences in the mitochondria might affect our aging. Hey, wait, you know what? There's more of why mitochondria are important. How about sexual reproduction and the two sexes? This has been an enigma for scientists for a long time, like the origins of sexual reproduction. If you think about it, if you're reproducing sexually, you've got to take two parents, and you got to get a copy of each of their genomes to combine to form a new offspring. So you, for example, you've got 23 chromosomes from mom, 23 from dad. Put them together, you got 46 chromosomes, and you're diploid, right? You get two copies of your genome. So why do it that way? Why not just reproduce by asexual reproduction? Why not just have binary fission or reproduce asexually? Why have to go out and find a mate? And the answer might be mitochondria. You see, mitochondria, as you just learned, are reactive. I mean, they can damage the cells they live in. And if you're a eukaryotic cell, you're first evolving, and you get a reactive oxygen species, hits your DNA, damages a certain gene, the cell dies. The mitochondria go down with it. But wait a second, what if we could get two copies of our genome? If we could have two copies of our genome, then if you lost a gene on one copy, you've got a backup copy that can keep going. And that's why we think that the mitochondria may have led to the origins of sexual reproduction. Now, even more so. Okay, and interestingly, the mitochondria may have been responsible also for the evolution of two sexes. This has really been an enigma for scientists for a long time, right? Okay, so you got to compete with these asexually reproducing organisms. But if you reproduce sexually, you have to find, another mate and then reproduce. But if you have male and female, you cut your potential mates in half. So why have two sexes? Well, it turns out that, mitochondria were once free-living bacteria, right? And they reproduce inside of your cells through binary fission, just like bacteria do. But that's asexual, so they're all clones of each other. So if you combine two gametes and you combine two populations of mitochondria, right, then what happens is mitochondria would compete for each other. So the way to get around that is only one mating type, the female, is where you get your mitochondria from. So most of the time, not always, but most of the time throughout the animal kingdom, you can always recognize a female because she produces the much larger egg where you get all your mitochondria from. So that's kind of interesting that mitochondria were not only responsible for the evolution of sexual reproduction, but the two sexes as well. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this, and now that you might have a little bit more appreciation for why cellular respiration matters and why mitochondria are really cool. Okay, so stay tuned because the next episode is going to be an overview of cellular respiration. All right, this has been Tom Kennedy Science.